The Zynax Empire ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. Their dominance stretched across countless systems, subjugating any species that stood in their way. They weren't just conquerors, they were masters of fear. Fear was their weapon, and they wielded it with brutal precision. Their empire thrived on the misery of others, and their reputation was built on a foundation of cruelty. The Zynax didn't just defeat their enemies, they humiliated them, showing the galaxy that they were supreme in every way. For the Zynax, power wasn't enough, they craved control. Every act of dominance had to be public, a performance of sorts. And their most prized spectacle was the Zeroth. A creature of nightmare proportions, the Zeroth was their living symbol of terror, used to execute those unfortunate enough to defy the Zynax. Each execution was a message, not just to their enemies but to their own citizens. This is what happens when you challenge us. The Zeroth was unleashed to devour, destroy, and terrify, leaving nothing but screams and silence in its wake. On the farthest reaches of the galaxy, on a small, seemingly insignificant human colony, the Zynax had extended their grasp. The colony, one of Earth's outposts, had once thrived in the peacefulness of isolation. It wasn't a major player in galactic affairs, nor did it pose any threat to the Zynax Empire. But to the Zynax, any human existence was a threat. Humans were primitive, insignificant, barely worth acknowledging, yet they had potential. Potential was dangerous. The Zynax invasion was swift. The humans, unprepared for the overwhelming force of the Empire, could do little to defend themselves. Within days, the colony had fallen. The once vibrant settlement, with families and children, became a shadow of its former self. The Zynax soldiers marched through the streets, their cold, emotionless eyes watching every movement. Curfews were imposed, food was rationed, and dissent was met with instant punishment. The colony was no longer a home, it was a prison. For the human colonists, the fear was unrelenting. Parents hid their children, knowing that the Zynax had a particular interest in them. The Zynax believed that by targeting the young, they could extinguish any hope for resistance. Each family lived in constant dread, waiting for the knock on the door that would take their child away. Rumors spread through the colony of what happened to the children taken by the Zynax, but no one spoke them aloud. It was too terrifying to even consider. In the midst of this horror was Lily. A small, quiet girl, she had been born on the colony, never knowing the life her parents once lived on Earth. She was no more than 10 years old, her eyes wide with innocence but her spirit already hardened by the reality of their situation. Her parents tried to shield her from the worst of it, but in their eyes she saw the fear they could not hide. And when the Zynax soldiers came for her, there was nothing they could do to stop it. Lily was taken without ceremony, snatched from her home as her parents watched helplessly. There was no farewell, no moment of comfort, just the cold, metallic grip of the Zynax guards. She was marched, along with other children, to the holding chambers where they awaited their fate. And the fate was clear, they were to be fed to the Zeroth. As she sat in the cold, sterile room, surrounded by others who were too scared to even cry, something strange began to happen. Lily, though afraid, wasn't as consumed by fear as the others. There was a calmness in her, an odd sense of stillness that seemed to radiate from her. The other children began to notice it too, their eyes occasionally flickering to her as if drawn to her presence. It was as though she carried a quiet strength, something they couldn't quite understand, but something that gave them a flicker of hope. There had always been something different about Lily, though no one could explain it. Animals on the colony seemed to gravitate toward her. Birds, small creatures, even the more cautious wildlife of the planet, seemed to lose their fear in her presence. They would approach her, sometimes sit beside her, and her parents would often remark how the animals trusted her in ways they never had with anyone else. It had always been a curious, benign trait, until now. As Lily waited, the tension in the colony rose. Word spread quickly. The Zynax were preparing another execution, and this time, they were going to make a statement. They would feed the human children to the Zeroth. It was a display designed to crush whatever hope the humans had left, to show them that their future, their very lineage, was in the hands of the Zynax. The colonists gathered, though not willingly, to witness the execution. The Xynax soldiers herded them like cattle, forcing them to watch as their children were led to the slaughter. Lily, along with the other children, was marched into the massive arena where the Zeroth waited. The creature was beyond anything a human could comprehend, a massive, hulking beast, all teeth, claws, and malice. Its very presence radiated fear. As the children were brought closer, the beast stirred, its hunger awakened by the scent of fear and vulnerability. It was the Xynax's ultimate weapon, their tool of terror, and it had never failed to destroy. But Lily wasn't like the others. As the Zeroth's massive eyes settled on her, something strange happened. Instead of recoiling in terror, she looked directly at the beast, her small hand reaching out as if she could touch it from where she stood. The crowd gasped, the Xynax soldiers stiffened, and for a moment, there was a tense silence. The Zeroth stopped moving. Its growl quieted, its massive body shifting ever so slightly, and then it did something no one expected. It bowed its head, as if acknowledging Lily. The air was thick with disbelief. The Xynax, so confident in their domination, suddenly found themselves questioning what they were witnessing. The Zeroth had never shown mercy, never paused in its brutality. And yet, here it was, seemingly tamed by the touch of a human child. The human colonists, who had come to witness the loss of their future, now saw something else entirely. In that moment, they didn't see defeat, they saw possibility. The atmosphere inside the Xynax arena was electric, brimming with the tension of both excitement and dread. The arena was a massive, imposing structure, designed to awe and intimidate all who entered. Cold, metallic walls rose high into the sky, a stark contrast to the natural world it sought to dominate. Rows upon rows of Xynax citizens filled the stands, their cruel faces lit with anticipation. For them, this was entertainment, an exhibition of their empire's unchallenged power. They reveled in it, eager for the moment when the infamous Zeroth would be unleashed once more. The roars of the Xynax crowd echoed through the air like a wave of dark energy, suffocating any sense of hope among the human captives who had been forced to attend. The colonists stood in silence, huddled together, feeling small and powerless in the face of such overwhelming cruelty. This was not just a spectacle to the Xynax. It was a demonstration of control, a ritual designed to break the spirit of anyone who dared oppose them. The humans knew this. They knew that today, in this very arena, they would witness the sacrifice of one of their own, Lily, a child whose only crime was being born human under the gaze of the Xynax Empire. The fear was palpable among the human captives. Parents held their children close, their hearts filled with both sorrow and terror. For them, this was not a simple execution but the death of innocence itself. Their grief hung heavy in the air, a silent but profound expression of their helplessness. They had lost so much already, but this was something else. To see a child fed to the beast was a cruelty beyond words. And yet, there was nothing they could do. Powerless, they could only watch. Then came the sound that silenced even the roaring crowds, the iron gates of the arena slowly groaning open. Beyond them, shrouded in shadow, lay the Zeroth. The beast was a terror of legend, a creation of nightmares that lived and breathed destruction. It was massive, towering above all who stood in the arena, its thick hide covered in dark, coarse scales that glistened under the harsh lights. Its claws, each as long as a man's arm, scraped the ground as it moved forward with a terrifying grace. Its maw, lined with rows of jagged teeth, dripped with anticipation. Every step it took shook the earth beneath it. This was the Xynax's ultimate weapon, their symbol of unrelenting terror. As the Zeroth emerged from the shadows, the crowd erupted in a deafening cheer. This was the moment they had come for. They had seen it before, countless times, the inevitable destruction, the final screams of the condemned. But this time, it was different. It was a child standing before the beast, and somehow, that made it all the more sinister. The Xynax did not care about the age of their victims. To them, weakness was weakness, whether in a child or an adult. Lily stood in the center of the arena, a tiny figure against the backdrop of the monstrous Zeroth. The beast moved toward her, its eyes burning with the instinct to kill. The crowd's cheers grew louder, feeding off the growing tension. But in the midst of it all, something unexpected happened. Lily did not cry, she did not scream. She stood there, still and calm, her small face filled with an expression not of fear, but of quiet understanding. There was a purity in Lily's gaze, a deep innocence that seemed to transcend the brutality of the moment. As the Zeroth drew closer, its enormous frame towering over her, she reached out her hand, not in desperation, but with a strange sense of trust. It was an action so unexpected, so out of place, that it silenced the crowd in an instant. Even the Zynax, so sure of their impending spectacle, were caught off guard. The Zeroth stopped. It hesitated, something it had never done before. There was a shift in the air, a sudden change in the energy of the arena. The beast, whose every instinct should have driven it to attack, to devour, found itself unwilling to move. Its ferocity melted away, replaced by something far more astonishing, curiosity. It lowered its head, its massive eyes locking with Lily's, and in that moment, it was as if the entire galaxy stood still. Lily's hand remained outstretched, and the Zeroth responded by gently pressing its snout against her palm. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a stunned silence. No one, either human nor Zynax, had ever witnessed such a thing. The Zeroth, the most feared beast in the galaxy, had submitted to a child. The arena, which moments before had been filled with the deafening roar of excitement, was now quiet, suffused with an air of disbelief. For the Zynax, this was incomprehensible. Their beast, their symbol of control and dominance, had been tamed, not by force, but by the gentle hand of a child. The Zynax leaders, watching from their elevated seats, exchanged confused glances. This was not how the execution was supposed to unfold. The Zeroth was meant to kill, to destroy, to reinforce their power. And yet, here it was, bowing to the will of a human child. Among the human captives, the shock was just as profound. They had expected to witness the death of one of their own, another cruel chapter in their suffering. But what they saw instead was something they could scarcely believe. In Lily's calmness, in her connection with the Zeroth, they saw a glimmer of hope, something they had not felt in a long, long time. Lily's interaction with the Zeroth was not one of dominance, but of understanding. It was as if she and the beast shared an unspoken bond, a connection that transcended the violence and fear that had defined their lives. For the humans watching, it was a moment of profound realization. Perhaps there was more to their species than the Zynax had ever understood. Perhaps their strength lay not in brute force, but in something far deeper, something the Zynax could never comprehend. As the Zeroth remained still, gently nuzzling Lily's hand, the crowd began to stir. Confusion rippled through the Zynax audience, their cheers fading into murmurs of uncertainty. What had just occurred? How could a child, a human child, halt the most dangerous creature in the galaxy? The Zynax, so certain of their superiority, were now confronted with something they could not explain. In that moment, Lily became more than just a child. She became a symbol of something the Zynax had overlooked for so long, the power of compassion, of understanding, of connection. The Zeroth had seen it, and so had the humans. And in the silence that followed, it was clear that the Zynax had been wrong to underestimate the power of a human heart. What no one in the arena realized was that Lily possessed a power far older than the Zynax Empire itself. Her calm demeanor in the face of the Zeroth wasn't just the product of innocence or luck. Deep within her, an ancient force stirred, a forgotten legacy of humanity's early days. Long ago, when humans lived in harmony with Earth's wild and untamed creatures, there had been a time when people like Lily existed in abundance. They were not warriors, nor were they rulers. They were something far more powerful. They were the bridge between humanity and nature. This gift, dormant for generations, had manifested in Lily. Lily didn't understand it, of course. She had always been different, but in the quiet, subtle ways that children often are. Animals had always gravitated toward her, whether it was the birds on her home colony or the small creatures in the forest near her home. It was as if they sensed something in her, something soothing. And now, faced with a beast as terrifying as the Zeroth, that same energy, that quiet and unspoken connection, had saved her life. What Lily didn't know was that this wasn't just her personality, or a unique trait, it was something far more profound. This ability, buried deep in the human gene pool, had been all but forgotten in the vast expanse of humanity's journey across the stars. As humans built their empires, created their technologies, and reached further into the cosmos, they had left behind the ancient connection that had once bonded them to the creatures of Earth. But nature had not forgotten, and in Lily, that connection had resurfaced. The energy Lily radiated was not something that could be easily seen or measured, but its effects were undeniable. The Zeroth, a creature bred and conditioned for destruction, had responded to her as if she were an old friend. It was more than just fear or intimidation, it was trust, an instinctual recognition that this small child posed no threat, that she was someone to be protected, not harmed. In Lily's presence, even the wildest, most feral beasts would pause, their aggression melting into something softer, more peaceful. It was as if she carried a piece of ancient Earth within her, a piece that the creatures of the galaxy could sense and respond to. But while this power might have been a source of hope for the human colonists, it was something far more dangerous in the eyes of the Zynax Empire. The Zynax, who had long dismissed humans as primitive and weak, now saw the potential for something far more troubling. If a human child could control a creature as deadly as the Zeroth, what else could she, and by extension, her people, do? The Zynax had spent centuries perfecting their control over the galaxy's most dangerous creatures, using fear and domination to bend them to their will. But Lily represented something they couldn't fully understand, something that threatened their iron grip on power. The Zynax leaders, who had watched the scene unfold in the arena with a mixture of confusion and disbelief, quickly realized the implications. If they could harness Lily's ability, they wouldn't just control the Zeroth, they could potentially control every feral beast in the galaxy. The thought of it was intoxicating. In their eyes, Lily wasn't a threat to be eliminated, she was an opportunity to be exploited. And so, even as the crowd buzzed with shock and the humans dared to hope, the Zynax began to plan. Their intentions were clear. They would capture Lily, study her, and find a way to weaponize her gift. If they could replicate what she had done with the Zeroth, they would no longer need to rely on brute force to control the galaxy's wildest creatures. Instead, they could use Lily's abilities to subdue them, to tame them, and to unleash them upon their enemies whenever they saw fit. To the Zynax, Lily was not a child, she was a tool, a living weapon that could tip the scales of power in their favor forever. The Zynax leaders moved swiftly, issuing secret orders to their soldiers. Lily would be taken, quietly and without resistance. They would separate her from the human colonists, from anyone who might interfere with their plans. They couldn't afford to let the humans realize what they had in their midst. To them, Lily was nothing more than a child who had been lucky enough to survive the Zeroth. But the Zynax knew better, and they wouldn't let such a valuable asset slip through their fingers. For Lily, the danger was real and immediate. She didn't fully understand what had happened in the arena, but she knew that something inside her had changed. The connection she had felt with the Zeroth was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. It was as if, for a brief moment, she had seen into the creature's soul, and it had seen into hers. And in that moment, they had understood one another. But now, that same connection was what put her at risk. The human colonists, too, began to sense the shifting tides. They had watched in awe as Lily had calmed the Zeroth, but now, their hope was tempered with fear. If the Zynax realized what Lily was capable of, they would stop at nothing to control her. The colony had already lost so much, they couldn't bear to lose Lily as well. She had become their symbol of hope, the one spark in the darkness of their oppression. But how could they protect her against an empire as ruthless as the Zynax? Lily, for her part, struggled with the weight of her newfound power. She didn't want to be special. She didn't want to be different. All she had ever wanted was to live peacefully with her family, to grow up and have a normal life. But now, that seemed impossible. The Zynax would never let her go. She was too valuable, too dangerous in their eyes. And yet, she couldn't simply ignore what she had discovered. If her power could save her people, could protect the ones she loved, then didn't she have a responsibility to use it? But at what cost? The moral dilemma weighed heavily on Lily. She was just a child, and yet, she now faced a choice that no one her age should ever have to make. Should she let herself be used by the Xynax, knowing that they would exploit her abilities for their own gain? Or should she find a way to use her gift to protect her people, even if it meant risking her own safety? In her heart, Lily knew the answer, but the path ahead was fraught with danger. The Xynax would not give up easily, and the cost of defying them could be far greater than she had ever imagined. As the Xynax closed in, plotting to take her away, Lily found herself standing at the crossroads of destiny, unsure of which path to take. Lily stood at the crossroads of fate, but the choice had already been made in her heart. She understood now that her power was not a curse or a weapon to be exploited by the Xynax. It was a gift, something ancient and deeply woven into the fabric of humanity. But it wasn't just for her, it was for all those who had been oppressed, for every creature and every person who had suffered under the Xynax's brutal reign. She wouldn't allow herself to become their pawn. Instead, she would fight back. She would use the very thing they sought to control to destroy their tyranny. It began quietly. Lily, with her newfound understanding, reached out to the Zeroth once more, not with fear or urgency, but with the calm, deep connection they had shared in the arena. The bond was stronger now, more certain. The Zeroth, no longer a tool of destruction, but an ally, responded to her with a loyalty and trust that transcended any command the Xynax could ever give. The great beast, once feared across the galaxy, had become something more, a symbol of rebellion, of resistance. But Lily knew that the Zeroth alone wasn't enough. The Xynax Empire's power stretched far and wide, built not just on their own strength, but on the backs of enslaved creatures from countless worlds. Beasts from distant stars, creatures of immense power and fearsome might, had all been captured and broken by the Xynax, their spirits crushed under the weight of the Empire's cruelty. These creatures, though powerful, were not inherently evil. Like the Zeroth, they had been twisted into weapons, forced to fight and kill at the Xynax's command. And now, Lily knew that she could reach them, just as she had reached the Zeroth. One by one, Lily began to connect with these creatures. With each connection, a ripple of rebellion spread through the galaxy. The beasts, once chained and controlled, began to break free. Their loyalty shifted from the Xynax to Lily, not because of fear or dominance, but because of something far more powerful: empathy. Lily's gift wasn't just about taming or controlling, it was about understanding. She could feel the pain of the creatures, their longing for freedom, their desire to be more than weapons. And in turn, they could feel her compassion, her strength, her determination to set them free. As the rebellion grew, the Xynax began to realize that something was happening, something far beyond their control. What had started as a single, inexplicable event in the arena had now become a full-scale uprising. Beasts from every corner of the galaxy were turning on their captors, refusing to fight, refusing to be used any longer. The Xynax, so confident in their ability to dominate through fear, found themselves overwhelmed by a force they had never anticipated: unity. The rise of the beasts was a sight to behold. Creatures of all shapes and sizes, once feared and despised, now fought alongside humans in a common cause. The Zeroth led the charge, its massive form striking fear into the hearts of the Xynax soldiers who had once commanded it. But it was not alone. From the skies came winged beasts with scales that shimmered in the starlight, their screeches a battle cry for freedom. From the forests and the plains, creatures with claws and fangs joined the fight, no longer restrained by the chains of the Xynax Empire. For the humans, it was a moment of overwhelming emotion. They had lived in fear for so long, oppressed and powerless, but now, for the first time, they stood with hope in their hearts. It wasn't just that the beasts were fighting with them, it was that they were fighting for something greater than survival. They were fighting for freedom, for the chance to live without fear, without oppression. And at the center of it all was Lily, the child who had brought them all together. The final battle came swiftly. The Xynax, though powerful, were unprepared for the sheer force of will that the rebellion had unleashed. Their empire, built on fear and domination, began to crumble as the beasts and humans struck at its heart. The Xynax soldiers, once so confident in their control, found themselves overwhelmed, not by raw power, but by something far more formidable, the strength of unity and compassion. Lily, standing at the forefront of the rebellion, never wavered. She understood now that the true strength of humanity didn't lie in its ability to conquer or destroy. It lay in its capacity to connect, to understand, to care. The beasts fought for her, not because they were forced to, but because they believed in her vision of a world where they could be free, where they could live without fear. It was a vision that transcended species, one that united humans and creatures alike in a common cause. As the battle raged, the Xynax Empire began to fall. Their weapons, their soldiers, their once indomitable rule, all crumbled in the face of a rebellion they had never expected. But it wasn't a rebellion of violence for violence's sake. It was a rebellion of empathy, of understanding, of the belief that true power came from unity, not domination. In the end, the Xynax were defeated, not by the sheer force of the beasts or the weapons of the humans, but by the undeniable strength of compassion and empathy. Lily had shown the galaxy that there was another way, a way that didn't rely on fear or cruelty. She had proven that even the most feral of creatures could be reached, could be understood, if only one took the time to listen, to care. As the dust of battle settled, Lily stood among the wreckage of the Xynax Empire, not as a conqueror, but as a symbol of hope. The humans, once prisoners in their own colony, were now free to rebuild not just their homes, but their lives. And they would not rebuild alone. The beasts, once enslaved by the Xynax, had become their allies, their friends. Together, humans and creatures began the long process of healing, of creating a new world where both could coexist in peace. Lily's bond with the Zeroth, and with the other beasts, was a reminder to all who had witnessed the rebellion that true strength didn't come from domination or control. It came from the ability to understand, to connect, to care. The Xynax had underestimated humanity, had failed to see that their greatest strength wasn't in their technology or their numbers, but in their hearts. And so, as the humans and beasts worked side by side to rebuild their colony, they carried with them the lesson that Lily had taught them all, that in the end, the greatest power in the galaxy wasn't fear, it was compassion.